At 56 years, old Phil Mickelson has collected every major prize golf can give. 6 majors, Hall of Fame status, career earnings past $1 billion. None of that shields him right now. 2 lifelong family businesses are being forced into total liquidation. The man who built an empire on the course, and off it is watching pieces of that empire disappear. Every golf fan is asking the same thing. How does this happen to someone with his money, his status, and his success? Which businesses are gone? And what sequence of events made liquidation the only remaining option? This is not simply a story of business failure. It is the story of a chain reaction that began years earlier, involving hundreds of millions of dollars, a golf league now on the brink, gambling losses that would destroy most people, and a private family health crisis that has kept him off the course for nearly all of 2026. Every piece connects to the next. Once you see the full picture, the liquidations stop looking like isolated events and start looking inevitable. In my view, this is what happens when a career built on calculated risk finally runs out of luck. Did Phil bring this on himself, or is he a victim of circumstances beyond his control? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you want the next developments as they break, hit subscribe. There is more coming. The numbers alone never explain what actually happened. This story is not really about money. To understand what got liquidated, you first have to know exactly which businesses we are talking about. These were not casual side projects or one-off investments. They carried his name, his family's involvement, and his long-term plans. The first is a set of Five Guys franchises in Orange County, California. Phil was part of an ownership group that held the rights to multiple locations in one of the most expensive commercial real estate markets in the country. Five Guys is still a major fast food brand, but 2026 has been brutal for the chain. Locations have been closing quietly across several states. Operating costs have exploded. Rent, labor, beef prices, utilities, franchise fees. Everything costs more. When you run several full-scale restaurants employing dozens of people, those costs multiply fast. Monthly payroll alone across the group could easily hit $250,000 before a single burger is sold. Add food costs, utilities, and the fees owed to corporate every quarter, and the math becomes unforgiving. In Orange County, you are also competing with every other fast casual concept within a 2-mile radius, while paying some of the highest commercial lease rates in America. When consumer spending tightened this year, the revenue dip was not a gentle 10%. It was deeper. Once the numbers stopped working, the banks started asking hard questions. The second business is smaller and more personal. In 2020, Phil co-founded For Wellness with longtime partner Dave Phillips. The flagship product was called The Good Stuff, a coffee-based nutritional supplement aimed at energy and focus. It was his attempt to blend his well-known love of coffee with his identity as a professional athlete. The company operated out of Scottsdale and at its peak employed roughly 5 people. It was never a giant operation, but it was his name, his brand, his family's involvement. The wellness supplement category is merciless. You are competing against companies that can drop $10 million on a single advertising campaign. Name recognition from golf does not automatically translate into someone in Ohio picking your product off a grocery shelf. When the marketing budget dried up, sales followed. 5 employees does not sound like much until those 5 people have families and mortgages, and you cannot make payroll on Friday. Neither business failed because the ideas themselves were bad. Five Guys remains a successful system. Performance coffee is still a growing category. So, what actually happened? Both companies became collateral damage in a much larger storm that had been building for years. Phil faced 2 problems that made those businesses unsustainable. The first was his LIV golf contract. The second was a habit he had carried for decades. Start with LIV. In 2022, Phil signed a deal reported at approximately $200 million to join the Saudi-backed league. At the time, it looked like the smartest financial move of his later career. He was already in his 50s. His peak competitive years were behind him. The contract promised generational security. The cost was the permanent destruction of his relationship with the PGA Tour. Bridges were burned that could never be rebuilt. Fast forward to 2026. The Saudi Public Investment Fund, after pouring more than $5 billion into LIV, pulled the funding. The league that had been spending money at an unsustainable rate suddenly had no reliable cash flow. It is now scrambling to raise $300 million in fresh capital by September 1st. If it fails, the entire operation collapses. Every player who left the PGA Tour for LIV is staring at the same empty promise. The 9-figure guarantees were never fully protected if the league itself failed. Phil, who had walked away from the tour with no realistic path back, found his primary income stream cut off. Those businesses still needed operating capital that was no longer arriving, but the LIV situation is only half the story. The other half involves money lost long before the league ever existed. Phil's gambling history is documented. Over 3 decades, his losses approached $100 million. Between 2010 and 2014 alone, he lost more than $40 million. The total amount wagered across his lifetime exceeded $1 billion. One ordinary day in June, he dropped $143,000 on baseball bets. For most people, that is a house. For him, it was just another Tuesday. Golf rewards the belief that you can control outcomes through skill and will. That same mindset bled into the betting window. Sometimes he won. Over 30 years, the house always wins. There is nothing illegal about legal gambling. The scale is what becomes impossible to ignore. When you are bleeding millions year after year, decision-making changes. Relationships change. The ability to keep businesses funded changes. In 2016, he was forced to repay $1 million in profits from an insider trading case. He was never charged with a crime, but he had to give the money back. The gambling continued. The public scrutiny continued. Combine decades of losses with the sudden disappearance of LIV income, and the safety net businesses became the first things to go. Even that was not the end. Something else happened that altered how parts of the golf world viewed him. The Farms Golf Club in Rancho Santa Fe is one of the most exclusive private clubs in California. It was Phil's home course for years. Membership at a place like that is more than a place to play. It is a social institution. Deals are made. Families grow up there. Your name is on a locker. In 2026, the club took what its official statement called decisive action. Multiple reports described an incident involving a female employee and allegations of inappropriate contact. After an internal investigation, the club revoked his membership. He was not gently asked to leave. He was told he could not come back. One of the greatest players of his generation was told he was no longer welcome at his own club. That is not merely embarrassing. It is humiliating. It signaled that the damage to his reputation had moved beyond gambling and league politics into personal conduct. Around the same time, the Madison Club in La Quinta saw similar pressure. Phil owned a condo there. After the accumulated damage, his wife Amy's wealth management firm stepped in and demanded the property be sold immediately. Not listed, not rented, gone. When the people who manage your money start forcing asset sales, the cash flow crisis is real, and the creditors are already circling. Then came the personal blow that may have been the final straw. In 2026, Phil has competed in only one official event all year. He missed the Masters. He missed the PGA Championship. He has been absent from LIV. The reason is not golf-related. It is a private family health matter involving one of his children. Amy, herself a breast cancer survivor, has been dealing with the same crisis. Phil has stepped away to focus on his family. When you are not playing, you are not earning. The rent on the restaurants still comes due. The employees still need to be paid. The supplement company still has costs. With tournament income gone, LIV money gone, and sponsors unwilling to associate with the current version of his brand, liquidation became the only remaining move. Total liquidation is cold and final. A court-appointed liquidator catalogs every grill, every fryer, every cooler, every register. Notices go on the doors. Staff receive a short timeline. Then the locks change. The lease returns to the landlord. The signage comes down. For wellness, the remaining inventory is sold at a fraction of retail. The Scottsdale office is emptied. The 5 people who believed in the project receive whatever severance is left, which is usually nothing. These were not anonymous corporations. They carried Phil's name and his family's hopes. Watching them disappear is personal. So, how does a man still reported to be worth between $300 and $383 million end up liquidating businesses? The mechanics are simple and brutal. The companies had debts they could not service. Creditors went to court. The court ordered the assets sold to satisfy the obligations. That is the reality. The businesses are gone. The only question left is what happens to Phil Mickelson now. LIV may not exist in 2027. If the $300 million does not appear by September, the league is finished. There is no clear path back to the PGA Tour. The relationship is, in his own earlier words, detonated and destroyed. Reinstatement would require a suspension and a fine likely measured in the tens of millions. He still has significant personal wealth, but at 56, with no competitive home and a reputation in pieces, the options narrow. One path is the Champions Tour. He is age-eligible. The crowds are smaller. The purses are modest. The ego that defined his career would have to accept a quieter stage. Jack Nicklaus and Tom Watson walked that road. Whether Phil can is still unknown. The major championship organizations have remained silent. They are not banning him. They are simply not calling. In golf, not being called is a form of erasure. Phil has said his priority is becoming the husband, father, and man his family deserves. That is an acknowledgement that the gambling, the league decision, and the way he treated people cost him more than money. They cost him parts of his legacy. He was once the second most marketable player in the game. Only Tiger was bigger. Endorsement deals lined up. He was the people's champion who took on the best and sometimes won. Now he is a cautionary tale about what happens when risk stops paying off. Money, fame, and past success do not protect you from the consequences of repeated decisions. Gambling does not only drain accounts, it drains relationships and reputation until the businesses you built with your own name become the first things the creditors take. You now know who, which, why, and how. The only question still unanswered is what remains for Phil Mickelson. He built an empire on the course and off it. Empires do not always last. At 56, with 2 family businesses forced into total liquidation, a $200 million contract in jeopardy, and nowhere left to play, the greatest gambler in modern golf may have finally placed one bet too many. The question is no longer whether he can come back. The question is what is left to come back to.